My name is Lucas Larson. I'm the lab director for cooperative plating, and today we're going to go over hazardous waste generator training. Today's topics, we're going to talk about steps to compliance, some of the different regulatory agencies, hazardous waste management, hazardous waste identification, evaluation, storage, and we're also going to talk about our contingency plan, what to do in case of emergencies and evacuations. Little background to get started, there's something called RCRA, which is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. It's a public law that creates the framework for the proper management of hazardous and non-hazardous solid waste. The law describes a waste management program mandated by Congress that gave EPA authority to develop the program. The main objectives here of RCRA are to protect human health and the environment, and to conserve material and energy resources. There's 10 basic steps to compliance with the hazardous waste regulations. Number 1 is evaluate waste and determine generator size. Number 2 is obtain a waste identification number. Number 3 is apply for a license and pay a fee. We have to pay a fee every year for our waste license. Number 4 is mark waste correctly, so that would be labeling. Number 5, store waste correctly. Number 6 is transport and dispose of hazardous waste correctly. Number 7, manifest shipments of hazardous waste, so that's the paperwork that needs to be filled out. Number 8 is plan for emergencies. We have a contingency plan. We are a large quantity generator of hazardous waste. Number 9 is personnel training, and number 10 is keeping records, which is very important. On the federal level, we have the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. We've got state level, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. On the county level, we're in Ramsey County, and we also have OSHA. Any of these can basically come out, do an inspection. They have the ability to give fines potentially. So first of all, what's the definition of a waste? Waste is a material that you no longer need, want, or use, something that you intend to discard. Hazardous waste management, it's important to note here that hazardous waste and chemicals can never be disposed of in the trash. If you do not know where to dispose of something, you need to ask your supervisor or the lab. Empty chemical containers must be rinsed out before they can be thrown in the trash. So first of all, we have identification, what is it? And then evaluation, is this a hazardous waste? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And then management, what are we going to do with it? Some of the different hazardous wastes that are generated on site here at Cooperative Plating, we have alkaline cleaner wastes, acid wastes, chromium wastes, and cyanide wastes. There's also another group of waste called universal waste. This includes things like used oil, oily rags, used fluorescent lamps, and used batteries. The regulations for these are a little bit different. So hazardous waste evaluation, we've got different sources of information. We have analytical testing of the waste. We have safety data sheets, which give composition and hazardous ingredients section. Waste profile, a lot of times if we generate a new waste, we will take a sample and send it to our waste vendor, and they will generate a waste profile. And also generator knowledge. So that's what we know about the waste. There's certain wastes that are considered listed wastes. By definition, EPA determined that some specific wastes are hazardous. These lists are organized into 3 categories. We've got F-listed wastes. These include spent solvents and waste from electroplating and manufacturing processes. We have K-listed. These are waste from specific sources such as chemical manufacturing, wood preserving, and petroleum refining industries. And U and P listed, these are discarded commercial chemical products. So for us here at Cooperative Plating, the F listed is going to be the most important. So some examples of the F listed waste that we generate here at Cooperative Plating. We have F006 waste code. These are wastewater treatment sludges from electroplating operations. Some examples that we generate here would be zinc ion exchange canisters, cyanide ion exchange canisters, cyanide filters, and zinc filters. Also, we have F008. This is another listed waste. These are plating bath residues from the bottom of plating baths from electroplating operations in which cyanides are used in the process. So for example, when we clean out a zinc cyanide plating tank, we have zinc cyanide sludge. That's an F008 waste. And the last one there is F009. These are spent stripping and cleaning bath solutions from electroplating operations in which cyanides are used in the process. Example would be our cyanide nickel strip. So is the waste hazardous due to a characteristic? There are certain characteristics that make a waste be considered hazardous. First up, we have ignitability. These are wastes with a flash point of 140 degrees Fahrenheit or less, or non-liquid that will spontaneously combust and burn persistently. Also, a real big one here is corrosivity. This is a D002 code. These are liquid waste with either a very low or a very high pH, so either less than or equal to 2 or greater than or equal to 12.5 would be considered corrosive. More characteristics, D001 oxidizers. These are chemicals that supply oxygen to a reaction in the absence of air. D003 is for reactivity, wastes which react violently with water, producing either flammable or toxic gases. In a lot of cases, cyanide waste will have a D003 code. And then we have a whole group, D004 through D043 for toxicity. These are wastes containing contaminants above a maximum allowable concentration. Some examples would be a D006 waste containing cadmium, D007 waste containing chromium, and D011 containing silver. We've got another type of waste that could be considered non-hazardous waste. It's important to keep non-hazardous waste separate from hazardous waste, because if you do combine them, then it all becomes hazardous waste, so you don't want to do that. Hazardous waste management. So this shows some different waste management that can be done. Starting at the top would be the most preferred methods. Source reduction and reuse, so that's reducing the amount of waste that you're generating in the first place. Next up would be recycling, and then energy recovery, and then down at the bottom, the least desirable, but sometimes it's your only option, is treatment and disposal, for example, into a landfill. Cradle to grave liability. This means that Cooperative Plating generates the waste, and then even after we ship it off site to our waste vendor, we're still ultimately responsible for that waste if something were to happen. So a little bit about waste aerosols. These must be completely empty at atmospheric pressure, never evaporate hazardous waste. We don't do that here because that requires a special permit. So determine generator status. First of all, we have something that's called a large quantity generator. This is a company that generates greater than 2,200 pounds of waste per month. Small quantity generator would be a company that generates between 220 and 2,200 pounds per month. And a very small quantity generator would be a company that generates less than 220 pounds per month. So cooperative plating is a large quantity generator. Just to give you an idea, for 2,200 pounds per month, that would be about 4 55-gallon drums. So that's not a lot. Universal and special wastes. Wastes that are deregulated if recycled. Examples would be waste antifreeze, waste batteries, waste circuit boards, waste fluorescent lamps, waste liquid mercury, and waste PCB ballasts. Those are all universal wastes. Next up, we'll talk about storage. All the waste storage here is indoors. We have impermeable floors. Waste needs to be stored in closed containers. Containers need to be in good condition with no leaks. We need to keep drip trays clean. We need clear aisle space around containers of hazardous waste and proper labeling. So, hazardous waste must be stored in closed containers. So you can see here, the picture on the left would be a proper way to store this drum. This is a satellite drum of a hazardous waste. You can see on the left, the funnel is closed and the bung is secure. The picture on the right would be an improper way to store that drum. You can see that the funnel is open and the bung is not secured. What we want here is that if the container or drum were to be overturned, we want it to be able to contain the waste. So that's why it's very important that it's closed. Container storage. So the picture on the left, we've got a bucket with some waste in it, no label and no cover. The second picture shows the proper way to store that hazardous waste with a cover and a proper label. Mark the hazardous waste container. There's 3 things that are required on the labels. The label must include the words hazardous waste, and then a clear description of the waste and the date. We also ask when people are filling out a label that they put their name or initials, so if we have any questions, we know who to ask. So here's just another example of a hazardous waste label. It's got the words hazardous waste, it's got a description, a date, and initials. Note here, if you're reusing a container to store hazardous waste, be sure to remove or black out any previous labels. Waste filters will be something that we generate quite a bit here. Be sure to dispose of waste filters in the correct drum. So we've got different waste streams for different types of filters. You can see here the filter chambers are labeled with where to dispose of the filters. Important here to note that labels need to be facing out so they're visible. If the label is not visible, it is considered as though the container is not labeled, which could lead to a finding, possible fine if we have an inspection. Also important, do not stack anything on top of containers of hazardous waste. And adequate aisle space. You must leave space and access to containers of hazardous waste. We want to be sure to separate incompatible wastes. Some examples of incompatible waste would be acids and bases, acids and cyanides, flammables and oxidizers. We want to make sure that there's no spillage on or around the containers. And inspect hazardous waste containers weekly and document inspections is a requirement. We have bulk hazardous waste storage tanks. These have secondary containment and ancillary equipment that's inspected daily. They have adequate overflow and leak detection. And we have a certification by an independent professional engineer that the tank system is adequate for the waste storage and treatment, and corrosion protection is adequate. Universal waste bulb storage. So these spent lamps need to be stored in closed containers. We have been cited by the US EPA on this in the past. Must have visible marking, waste lamps, used lamps, or universal waste lamps, and there is a storage time limit for these bulbs of 1 year. Accumulation and storage limits. For cooperative plating, as a large quantity generator, as far as the accumulation limit or amount of waste, we do not have a limit. However, we do have a storage time limit, which is 90 days of the accumulation start date. So what that basically means is once a waste container is full, then we have 90 days to ship it off-site. Satellite accumulation is something a little bit different. This is up to 55 gallons of a hazardous waste, must be under the direct control of the operator and visually inspected daily. No documented inspections are required. If not under the direct control of the operator, then must have documented weekly inspections. So satellite accumulation is for waste that you're generating very slowly. Once filled, then the container needs to be dated, and that's when the 90-day clock starts to ship it off-site. And also, once it's filled, we have 3 days to move it to the main storage area. Some common issues with hazardous waste storage. You can see the first picture, the white bucket there. It looks like it does have a label, but there's no cover. We have a drum that's either not labeled or the label is not facing out. And then we have some more, another bucket that does not have a cover. Here we've got a drum of hazardous waste that's got a lot of chemical residue on the outside that needs to be cleaned up. We have drums of hazardous waste that do not have adequate aisle space. You can see there's very little space there between those drums. Proper transport and disposal of waste. We need to follow all DOT regulations. Outside of containers need to be free from liquids or dried residue, need to have proper waste label and DOT diamond label, lock rings and or bungs properly secured. Containers must not fit on pallets, and we want to use pallets with no broken boards or exposed nails. So this is when the waste is ready to be shipped off-site. Manifests. This is the paperwork that goes along with each shipment of hazardous waste. It's a multi-page shipping document for off-site shipping of hazardous waste, cradle-to-grave management. It's a tracking document with several uses. It identifies the organization generating the waste, and it's important to note that only those people who have received a special manifest signers training can sign manifests. When to use a manifest. For all hazardous waste shipments except for the following: not used for used oil, waste fluorescent lamps, lead acid batteries, not for universal, special, or oily wastes. There's also paperwork called a land disposal restriction, or LDR. This notifies the receiving facility that the waste is restricted from land disposal. Next up, contingency plan, which we're required to have as a large quantity generator of hazardous waste. It's got several sections. Section 1 lists our emergency coordinators. Section 2 is emergency phone numbers. Section 3 is waste generated on-site. Section 4 is emergency response, who will respond, what they're going to do, what equipment they'll use, and who will be contacted. Section 5 is arrangements with local authorities, such as the fire and police department. Next up, we have release prevention measures, emergency equipment, and evacuation plan. You should know where the contingency plan is located. There's a copy in the lab, in each of the spill kits. There's a copy in waste treatment and in the office. Also, we have facility diagram and evacuation routes located throughout the shop. They're posted next to the phones. Emergency procedures for spills. The general guidance here is that you can clean up spills of less than 5 gallons if you have the proper equipment and feel comfortable doing so. Ask your supervisor or the lab about proper cleanup and disposal. Spills greater than 5 gallons, immediately notify the emergency coordinator. Currently, our emergency coordinator is on first shift. We have Ed Wakefield and myself. Second shift, Nam, and third shift, Stefan Fashant. Emergency phone lists are posted at phones throughout the shop and in the contingency plan. The emergency coordinators serve as supervisors and decision makers in emergency situations involving hazardous material or waste releases. They have the full backing of cooperative plating management for decision making and the use of company resources. They're available 24 hours a day. Do not hesitate to call an emergency or a potential emergency. How to notify the emergency coordinator. The paging system, so we have phones throughout the shop. You press the paging button, then press page. We have a phrase, code red, that we ask people to use to indicate an emergency. At this point, the plant is now under the control of the emergency coordinators until they give the all clear. Evacuation. You want to know your evacuation plan, know where the emergency evacuation exits are. We have a gathering point for accountability, which is south of the shipping bays. Shift supervisors, human resources are responsible for making sure everyone is accounted for. And do not re-enter the building until an emergency response coordinator has given the all clear. They'll let you know when it's safe to go back in. Spill response equipment. You should know what spill response supplies are available. We have 3 spill kits, one on each end of the shop and one in the middle next to the anodized line. These contain personal protective equipment such as gloves, safety glasses, face shields, boots, also absorbents, dikes, booms, overpacks to contain spills, soda ash to neutralize acid spills, caution tape, and a copy of the emergency response guidebook. Decontamination. We have eye wash stations located throughout the shop and also safety showers. Very important to keep the area clear around these for easy access. So if somebody does need to use one, they can get to it easily. These are for emergency use only. Training. So as a large quantity generator, we must ensure that employees who require training have received it within 6 months of the date of their employment or a change in job responsibility, and then annually after that. Training should be appropriate to the employee's job responsibilities, and we are required to maintain records of the training. This is something that's very important whenever we have an inspection. Whether it's the EPA, the state, or the county, they always ask to see training records. Record keeping. Records must be readily available for review. Records of training inspections and annual reports need to be kept for 3 years. Manifests for hazardous waste need to be kept for 3 years, and land disposal restriction forms for 5 years. It's recommended to keep records for the life of the organization. We generally keep the records indefinitely.